In this recording, I will be analyzing questions that cover the income statement. We'll begin with the percentage of completion method for revenue recognition. Now recall that the percentage of completion method is used, for example, for long-term construction contracts, where the period over which revenues will be recognized exceeds 1 year. So let's look at the first question. On March 15, 2012, Frankel Construction contracted to build a shopping center at a contract price of $120 million. First point, the contract price represents the total revenues to be received by Frankel Construction. Now, this is a 3-year contract. So total revenues of $120 million will be recognized over 3 years, 2012, 2013, and 2014. And as we are told in the question, now the question also shows that cash collections over the 3-year period are 30, 50, and 40, and the total is $120 million, which is the total revenues. Now, we are also provided with the cost information for the 3-year period. $25 million for 2012, 2013 $20 million, and 2014 $40 million, giving us a total construction cost of $85 million. Now, with this information, we should be able to calculate the percentage of completion for 2012, 2013, and 2014. Now, based off on that information, that is the percentage of completion, we can determine revenues to be recognized in each of the 3 years. So let's get started. Now, total cost is $85 million. And we were provided the breakdown of the cost incurred over the 3-year period, 25, 20, and 40. Now, what this means is that in 2012, the percentage of completion, the percentage of work done. Now, this is calculated by dividing the actual cost incurred by the total estimated cost. So 25 divided by 85 gives us 29% completion. So we can determine the revenues to recognize. That will be 29% of the total revenues, 120. 120 million represents 100% completion. The revenues for 100% completion. But for 29% completion, we have 29% by 120, we get 34.8. Now, if revenues is 34.8 and the cost was 25, we provided with this information. The income or gross profit will be 34.8 minus 25, which is 9.8. Now, in 2013, the cost is 20 million. Percentage of completion will be 24% because 20 divided by 85 is 24%, and revenues recognized will be 28.8. And gross profit or income will be 28.8 minus 20, and that gives us 8.8. 2014, cost incurred is 40 out of a total estimated cost of 85. So 40 over 85 will give us 47% of completion. So we can recognize 47% of total revenues, and we have 56.4 as revenues for 2014 minus the 40 million cost. We have a gross profit for 2014 of 16.4. Now we add up all the gross profit, which shows that total gross profit recognized for the 3-year period is 35. Total cost incurred is 85. We combine the two, we get total revenues of 120. We will look at the second question, which is on earnings per share, or EPS. Now, earnings per share is a very important performance measure. The reason being that it scales the performance of companies and allows us to compare across years and across companies. So we can compare performance for company A and company B by looking at EPS for company A and EPS for company B. Now recall that earnings per share is the net income divided by the total weighted average shares outstanding. Now, outstanding means the common shares that are issued and have not been repurchased. So let's look at Oil Services Corporation, which reports EPS data in its 2012 annual report. Now, net income is 1218. Basic EPS is 2.08. Diluted EPS is 2.06. Now recall that the diluted EPS is a smaller number compared to the basic EPS. The reason being that the denominator, which is the shares outstanding, becomes diluted. It's increased for the diluted EPS calculation. And when you have a bigger number in the denominator, the number calculated becomes smaller. Now, for the basic EPS, the shares outstanding is 586. So we asked how many weighted average shares were dilutive in 2012. Now, to solve this question, we look at the diluted EPS and figure out how we calculate the diluted EPS. Diluted EPS is net income divided by the common shares outstanding plus the dilutive shares. Now remember that dilutive shares are potential shares. For example, stock options. Another example of dilutive shares are convertible bonds. When the bonds are converted, they become shares. So they are potential shares, not yet shares. So we need to capture all those securities under dilutive shares and add them to common shares outstanding. Now, based on the formula we have here, we know that when we divide 1218 by 2.06, we will get the total for the common shares outstanding and the dilutive shares outstanding. So from the equation above here, 1218 divided by 2.06 gives us all of that. And that's what I have here. The basic shares or total shares outstanding plus the dilutive shares. So I can do this to make it even clearer. So that equals 1218 divided by 2.06, and we have 591 million. So when the denominator is 591, 1218 divided by 591 will give us the diluted EPS, which is 2.06. So if that is the case, and we know that the basic common shares outstanding is 586, then we can determine the dilutive shares by simply subtracting 586 from 591 million. And the dilutive shares are approximately 5 million. Now, the weighted average shares outstanding is used in the calculation for EPS because in some cases, shares are issued during the fiscal year. For example, let's take a company that has a fiscal year from January 1 to December 31. Let's assume that on January 1, it had 500 million shares. And then on October 1, it issued or sold 200 million shares in the stock market. Now, we cannot say that all the 200 million shares were outstanding for the entire year. So in calculating the EPS, we need to weight the 200 million shares. And that is why we have the concept of the weighted average common shares outstanding. And how do we weight the shares? We just do the calculation based on the proportion of the year it was outstanding. Now, how do we weight the shares? Bearing in mind that the shares were outstanding in October, November, and December. It was outstanding for 3 months out of 12 months. So 3 over 12 by 200 million. And the weighted amount will be 50 million. Now, what this simply means is that the 200 million shares that were outstanding for 3 months is equivalent to 50 million shares being outstanding for 1 year. So in this hypothetical example, the weighted average shares in the denominator will be 500 plus 50, and we will have 550 in the denominator. This brings us to the end of our analysis of income statement questions.